My name is Melissa Harper, and I'm 32 years old. Standing at the entrance of Eleanor's Rise, my fingers trembled as I clutched the keys to my brand new bakery. The grand opening sign fluttered in the morning breeze, a dream 15 years in the making. My heart ached knowing some chairs at the reserved family table might remain empty. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years had received invitations. Would any of them show? The sweetness of achievement mixed with the bitter taste of family estrangement made this morning both terrifying and exhilarating. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to choose between family expectations and following your heart. Trust me, the journey ahead has more twists than my signature cinnamon rolls. My love affair with baking began in my grandmother Eleanor's kitchen. I was barely tall enough to see over the countertop, standing on a wooden stool she had painted yellow just for me. Every Saturday morning, we had our special ritual. The house would still be quiet, everyone else asleep, when Grandma Eleanor would gently knock on my bedroom door at 6 a.m. I'd jump out of bed, already excited for what awaited. Ready to make some magic, sweet pea, she'd whisper, and I'd nod enthusiastically, slipping my small hand into hers. In her kitchen, everything had a place and a purpose. Her mixing bowls, worn from decades of use, lined the shelves. The measuring cups hung from little hooks, arranged by size. The morning light would filter through lace curtains, casting patterns across the flour-dusted countertop. But my favorite part was always the same, watching her hands. Grandma Eleanor had the most graceful hands, veined and spotted with age, yet so precise in their movements. Our specialty was cinnamon rolls. Not the quick kind from a can, but the real ones that required patience and love. She taught me how to activate the yeast, checking that the water was baby bath warm against my wrist. She showed me how to knead the dough until it felt as soft as a baby's bottom, a comparison that always made me giggle. Baking isn't just about feeding people, Melissa, she'd say, her blue eyes twinkling. It's about giving them a moment of pure happiness. When someone bites into something you've made with love, for just that moment, everything else fades away. She had a recipe book, not the fancy printed kind, but a collection of index cards, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes on scraps of paper, all tucked into a battered binder. Sometimes, she'd pull out a particularly stained recipe card and tell me the story behind it. The chocolate cake that won my grandfather's heart. The bread that got her through the difficult war years. The birthday cookies she made for my father when he was a little boy. Someday, she told me when I was 9, all these recipes will be yours. But don't just keep them in a book. Keep them alive. My father, Daniel, initially encouraged my budding passion. He'd proudly display my misshapen cookies at his office, telling me how his coworkers raved about them. He'd bring home professional baking magazines and circle recipes he thought I might like to try. When I was 10, he surprised me with my first real chef's apron, my name embroidered across the chest. "You've got a gift, Mel," he'd say, sampling my latest creation. A real gift. My mother Grace, however, was more practical. A registered nurse who had worked hard for her career, she valued stability and security above all else. "Hobbies are wonderful, Melissa," she'd say, carefully emphasizing the word hobby. "But you need something reliable to fall back on." Still, I persisted. In elementary school, my treats were the first to sell out at bake sales. Teachers would specifically request my cookies for class parties. I started a notebook, carefully documenting each recipe I tried, making notes about what worked and what didn't. There were failures, of course. The eclair disaster of 6th grade still makes me cringe. The pastry collapsed, the filling curdled, and the chocolate glaze separated into an oily mess. I cried for hours. But the next weekend, I tried again. And again. Until finally, I produced something that looked like the picture in the cookbook. When I was 11, Grandma Eleanor gave me the gift that changed everything, a professional stand mixer. It was fire engine red and gleamed under the kitchen lights. "This is a serious tool for a serious baker," she told me, her voice solemn. "I believe in you, Melissa." That mixer became my most prized possession, especially after my parents' divorce the following year. When the shouting became too much, when the tension in the house felt suffocating, I would retreat to the kitchen. The rhythmic sound of the mixer, the familiar scents of vanilla and cinnamon, the predictable chemistry of baking, these things became my sanctuary. If I couldn't control the chaos of my family falling apart, at least I could control what happened in my mixing bowl. At 14, I entered the regional youth baking competition on a whim. My entry was a 3-layer cake inspired by Grandma Eleanor's recipes but with my own twist, a lavender-infused cake with honey buttercream and fresh berries. When they called my name for first place, I couldn't believe it. The judge, a professional pastry chef from a downtown restaurant, pulled me aside afterward. "You have instinct," he said. "That can't be taught." Standing on that stage, trophy in hand, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't just a hobby or a coping mechanism. This was what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to own a bakery someday. A place where people could come and experience that moment of pure happiness Grandma Eleanor talked about. A place where I could keep her recipes alive. I went home and announced my decision to my divided family. My father had just remarried to Stephanie, and my mother was dating again. My brother Jason rolled his eyes. Only Grandma Eleanor nodded, as if she'd known all along. Eleanor's rise, I whispered to myself that night, imagining the sign above my future shop. Someday. Little did I know how difficult the journey to that someday would be, or how many relationships would be strained along the way. But in that moment, with the taste of victory still sweet on my tongue, anything seemed possible. By my senior year of high school, the vague dream of owning a bakery had solidified into a concrete goal. I researched culinary schools, collected brochures, and mapped out potential career paths. Meanwhile, my family had other plans. My father, influenced heavily by his new wife Stephanie, pushed me toward business school. "If you want to own a bakery someday, you need to understand business fundamentals," he argued during one of our weekly dinners at his new house. Stephanie, who worked in corporate finance, nodded emphatically beside him. "Marketing, accounting, management, these are the skills that will keep you from becoming just another failed small business statistic," she added, passing me yet another brochure for her alma mater. My mother's approach was different but equally persistent. During my weekend visits to her apartment, she'd leave nursing school pamphlets on my bed. "Healthcare is recession-proof," she'd say, her nurse's ID still hanging around her neck after a 12-hour shift. "People will always get sick. They won't always buy fancy pastries." I understood their concerns came from a place of love and life experience. But they couldn't see what I saw, that pursuing anything else would mean living someone else's life. My older brother Jason, home from his first year at a prestigious engineering school, was the most cutting. "Culinary school," he scoffed when I mentioned it at breakfast. "You're going to waste 4 years learning to make cupcakes? Real smart, Mel." His words stung more than I cared to admit. Jason and I had once been close, building pillow forts and defending each other against playground bullies. Now he looked at me like I was a stranger making incomprehensible choices. Only my younger sister Rachel, still in middle school and blissfully free from career pressures, supported me unconditionally. "Your chocolate eclairs are better than anything at the bakery downtown," she declared loyally. "You should open 10 bakeries." As college application season intensified, so did the tension at home. I filled out applications to 3 top culinary institutes but told no one. When an acceptance letter arrived from the prestigious Culinary Institute of America with a partial scholarship offer, I hid it in my underwear drawer for 3 days, simultaneously elated and terrified. Finally, I decided to break the news over dinner. I'd prepared my parents' favorite meal. My mother's beloved lasagna for her, my father's favorite apple pie for him. I thought the gesture might soften the blow. I was wrong. "The CIA," my father exclaimed, his fork clattering against his plate. "Do you have any idea what that costs, even with a scholarship?" "I've been saving," I said defensively. "And I can work while studying." "Saving from your part-time job at the grocery store?" he countered. "That's cute, Melissa. Real-world cute." My mother's reaction was quieter but no less devastating. She simply placed her napkin beside her plate, stood up, and began clearing dishes. "I suppose you've made your decision then," she said, her voice flat. "Don't expect me to bail you out when reality hits." Jason smirked across the table. "Hope you enjoy making minimum wage with a mountain of debt." The argument escalated, voices rising until my father delivered the final blow. "I won't fund a hobby, Melissa. Not when you could get a real education. If this is your choice, you're on your own." That night, I cried into my pillow, equal parts heartbroken and determined. The next morning, I began looking for full-time work. For the next several months, I juggled 3 jobs, mornings at a local coffee shop, evenings waiting tables, and weekend shifts at a catering company. I moved out of my mother's apartment into a tiny studio with a temperamental oven where I continued to practice my baking. The distance between me and my family grew. Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. Phone calls grew shorter and more perfunctory. Even Jason's teasing remarks faded into cold silence. Only Rachel remained unchanged, sneaking away to visit my apartment, sampling new recipes and offering unfailingly enthusiastic feedback. The 4 years of culinary school were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I learned classic French techniques, the science behind perfect pastry, the art of chocolate work. I stayed up until dawn perfecting my skills, survived brutal critiques from world-class chefs, and worked through holidays to afford tuition payments. Each time I mastered a new technique, I took a photo and sent it to my family's group chat. Usually, only Rachel responded. My graduation day arrived on a brilliant spring morning. I stood in my chef whites, diploma in hand, scanning the audience. Rachel sat alone, holding a bouquet of yellow daisies, my favorite. No mother. No father. No Jason. No Stephanie. "They're proud of you," Rachel insisted later, though we both knew it wasn't true. "They just don't know how to admit they were wrong." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The truth was both simpler and more complex. I had chosen my dream over their approval, and none of us knew how to bridge that divide. With my culinary degree in hand and a mountain of student loans looming, I plunged into the professional baking world with equal parts enthusiasm and desperation. My first real job was at Levine Pâtisserie, an upscale Brooklyn bakery known for its exquisite French pastries and celebrity clientele. The owner and head chef, Marcus Beaumont, had a reputation for brilliance and brutality in equal measure. "Your school techniques are garbage," he informed me on my first day, tossing my carefully crafted croissants into the trash. "Forget everything they taught you. You'll learn to bake my way or you'll clean toilets somewhere else." The kitchen operated with military precision. I arrived at 4 a.m. daily, often staying until after 6 p.m., for a salary that barely covered my share of a cramped apartment in Queens, shared with 3 other culinary graduates. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, to work through cuts and burns, to remake a batch without complaint when Marcus deemed it less than perfect. "Faster, Harper," he'd bark as I shaped baguettes. "My grandmother moves quicker, and she's been dead for 20 years. Despite his harsh methods, Marcus was a master of his craft. He taught me discipline and consistency, how each croissant must be identical, how a half-degree temperature difference in the kitchen could ruin a delicate pastry, how to develop an instinct for when dough had been mixed exactly enough. I learned more in 6 months under his exacting eye than in 4 years of school. On rare days off, I'd collapse in exhaustion but still find time to photograph my professional creations, sending them to my family group chat. Rachel would respond with strings of enthusiastic emojis. My mother occasionally sent a brief "looks nice." My father and Jason never replied. After a year of grueling apprenticeship, I met Sophia Mendez, the owner of 3 successful bakeries across Manhattan. She came to Levine one morning and watched silently as I worked, my hands moving confidently through the familiar motions of shaping delicate pastries. "You have good hands," she commented after Marcus stepped away. "And you don't flinch when he yells." "That's rare." 2 weeks later, she offered me a position as assistant pastry chef at her flagship location in Chelsea. The salary was better, the hours slightly more humane, and most importantly, Sophia allowed creative input. Under her mentorship, I began developing my own recipes, combining Grandma Eleanor's traditional American techniques with the French finesse I'd learned from Marcus. My signature cinnamon morning buns, swirled with orange zest, cardamom, and a touch of sea salt, became the bakery's bestseller. Food bloggers wrote about them. Lines formed before opening. For the first time, I felt like a real pastry chef, not just a student or apprentice. Just as my career was gaining momentum, my personal life took two dramatic turns. First came the call about my father's heart attack. Though only in his 50s, years of stress and poor diet had taken their toll. I caught the first train home, my chef's coat still dusted with flour, my hands smelling of butter and sugar. At the hospital, the family dynamics remained awkward, but the emergency created a temporary truce. My father, pale against the white sheets, managed a weak smile when I entered his room. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Of course I came," I replied, fighting back tears. During his recovery, I baked his favorite treats, bringing them daily to the hospital. My technical skills had improved so dramatically that even he had to acknowledge the difference. "These are better than I remember," he admitted, finishing his second maple pecan cookie. Maybe there was something to that fancy school after all. It wasn't a full apology or acceptance, but it was a start. For 2 weeks, we rebuilt a fragile connection. I shared stories about life in New York, carefully editing out the struggles and emphasizing the successes. He talked about his plans once he recovered. We avoided mentioning the years of silence between us. The second turning point came in the form of Tyler Bennett, a charming restaurant supplier who delivered specialty flowers to Sophia's bakery. He asked me out for coffee, which turned into dinner, which evolved into my first serious relationship since moving to New York. Tyler was attentive and supportive, at least initially. He brought me rare ingredients from his travels, bragged about my talents to friends, and seemed genuinely interested in my career. But as months passed, subtle cracks appeared. He'd make comments about my early morning schedule interfering with our social life. He'd question whether I really needed to work weekends. When Sophia promoted me to head pastry chef, his congratulations felt hollow. "It's great, babe," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "But when are you going to start thinking about the future? You can't be waking up at 3 a.m. when we have kids someday." The final blow came after I worked a brutal double shift, covering for a colleague with the flu. I dragged myself to Tyler's apartment, looking forward to collapsing in his arms. Instead, I found him with another woman, his ex-girlfriend who had just stopped by to pick up some mail. The betrayal, coming on the heels of physical exhaustion, broke something inside me. I fled to my shared apartment, locked myself in the bathroom, the only private space available, and sobbed until my roommates became concerned enough to pick the lock. That night, curled on my narrow bed, I hit emotional rock bottom. My career was succeeding, but at what cost? I was thousands of miles from home, estranged from most of my family, newly single, and so tired I could barely think straight. For the first time, I wondered if my parents and Jason had been right. Maybe chasing this dream had been a mistake. The next morning, still puffy-eyed and heartsore, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number from my hometown. It was my grandmother's lawyer. "Ms. Harper, I'm calling regarding Eleanor Harper's estate," he said formally. "There are some matters that require your attention." Grandma Eleanor had passed away 3 months earlier. I'd flown home for the funeral, stood awkwardly beside my family as they received condolences, and returned to New York with her treasured recipe binder tucked in my suitcase. I hadn't expected to hear anything further about her modest estate. "Your grandmother left specific instructions," the lawyer continued. "A separate account, intended solely for you, with one condition attached." The condition was simple yet profound: the money, nearly $200,000 from decades of careful saving and a small life insurance policy, could only be used for one purpose: opening my own bakery. With the inheritance came a letter, written in my grandmother's shaky hand during her final days. "My dearest Melissa, I've watched you fight for your dream when it would have been easier to surrender. You remind me of myself at your age, stubborn as a mule and twice as determined. This money has been set aside for years, waiting for the moment you were ready to take the final step. The world needs your talent, sweet pea. And you need to share it. Make something beautiful. Make something that lasts. I've always believed in you, even when others couldn't see what I saw. Now it's time for you to believe in yourself. All my love, always, Grandma Eleanor. Reading her words, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The path forward suddenly seemed obvious. It was time to go home, not to apologize or admit defeat, but to build something meaningful in the place where my journey began. Something that would honor Eleanor and heal old wounds. Something that would rise. 2 weeks after receiving Grandma Eleanor's inheritance, I gave notice at Sophia's bakery. She wasn't surprised. I've seen that look before, she said, giving me a rare hug. It's time to build my own nest look. You're ready. I packed my small apartment, shipped my professional tools and cookbooks ahead, and boarded a train back to my hometown of Millfield. The familiar landscape sliding past the window brought a mixture of nostalgia and anxiety. I hadn't lived here in nearly 8 years, and I was returning not as a visitor but with intentions to put down roots. My first week back, I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment downtown. The morning after moving in, I ventured out to the local grocery store for essentials. I was examining avocados when I heard a familiar voice. Melissa? Is that you? My mother stood at the end of the produce aisle, still in her nursing scrubs, surprise evident on her face. 8 years had added silver strands to her dark hair and fine lines around her eyes. Hi, Mom, I said, suddenly feeling like an awkward teenager again. I'm back. Not just visiting. She glanced at my shopping cart. Rachel mentioned something about you moving home. I thought she was confused. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. 1,000 questions hung in the air. Why are you really here? How long are you staying? Are you finally giving up on this baking nonsense? I should get going. Double shift today, she finally said, checking her watch. Maybe we can have coffee sometime. She walked away without waiting for an answer, her cartwheel squeaking against the linoleum. I stood frozen, the avocado still in my hand, wondering if all my hometown interactions would be this strained. The following weeks proved challenging but productive. I hired William Chen, a small business advisor recommended by the local Chamber of Commerce, to help navigate the complexities of opening a commercial establishment. Together, we developed a comprehensive business plan, including market analysis, 5-year projections, and marketing strategies. Your culinary background is impressive, William noted as we reviewed my resume. But banks will want to see management experience as well. Have you run a kitchen before? I had, in fact, managed Sophia's kitchen for the last year, overseeing 5 employees and handling inventory, scheduling, and quality control. The skills I'd gained there proved invaluable as I moved forward with my plans. The perfect location appeared almost serendipitously, a vacant storefront on Maple Street, the main thoroughfare through downtown Millfield. The space had previously housed a bookstore and featured large display windows, high ceilings, and a charming brick facade. When the realtor unlocked the door for our first viewing, I knew immediately this was it. The kitchen will need a complete renovation to meet commercial standards, the realtor warned. And the rent isn't cheap for this area. I nodded, already envisioning the layout: glass display cases along the right wall, small cafe tables by the windows, a partially open kitchen where customers could watch the baking process. The space had good bones and, most importantly, the right feeling. 3 days after signing the lease, I was measuring the front windows for displays when a familiar car slowed in front of the store. My mother, driving home from her shift, clearly spotted me through the glass. Our eyes met briefly. She accelerated and drove away without stopping. The rejection stung, but I had too much work ahead to dwell on it. The renovation began in earnest, plumbers installing commercial sinks, electricians updating the outdated wiring, contractors building the kitchen to my exact specifications. Each decision required careful consideration of both budget and vision. William helped me apply for a small business loan to supplement Grandma Eleanor's inheritance. The first bank rejected my application, citing insufficient collateral despite my substantial down payment. "It's not personal," William assured me. "First-time business owners, especially in food service, are considered high risk." The second bank was more receptive, particularly after I presented my portfolio of press clippings from my time at Sophia's bakery. Still, they required a co-signer with established credit. To my surprise, Rachel volunteered. "You'd do that for me?" I asked, stunned by her offer. "Are you kidding? I've been eating your practice batches since I was 9, she replied with a grin. "This is as much an investment in my future snacks as it is in your business." At 22, Rachel had graduated college and secured a stable job as a graphic designer at a local marketing firm. Her steady income and excellent credit score satisfied the bank's requirements. The loan was approved. Weekends became renovation marathons. Rachel arrived early on Saturdays, coffee and bagels in hand, ready to help paint walls and assemble furniture. We selected a warm cream color for the walls, accented with butter yellow trim, colors that reminded me of Grandma Eleanor's kitchen. "Remember how she let us lick the beaters?" Rachel reminisced as we painted. "Mom would freak out about salmonella, but Grandma just winked and said a little raw egg never killed anyone." These moments with Rachel bridged the years we'd spent apart, re-establishing our sisterly bond through shared memories and physical labor. By Sunday evenings, exhausted but satisfied, we'd order pizza and collapse on the drop cloths, surveying our progress. The most emotional moment came when it was time to name the bakery. Though I'd imagined Eleanor's rise since I was 14, now that the moment had arrived to make it official, I hesitated. What if it's too sentimental? I worried aloud to Rachel. Maybe something more modern would appeal to a broader clientele. Rachel shook her head firmly. "It's perfect. It honors Grandma and describes what happens to bread. Plus," she added with a gentle smile, "it's what you're doing too. Rising above everything that tried to keep you down." The day the sign was installed, a custom-made wooden board with Eleanor's rise in elegant gold lettering, I stood on the sidewalk watching the workers secure it above the entrance. Once they left, I remained there alone, tears streaming down my face. Seeing my dream materialized in physical form overwhelmed me. I wished Grandma Eleanor could see it. A comment on the bakery's newly created social media page that evening brought me crashing back to reality. My brother Jason had written, "Hope this hobby doesn't break the bank too quickly." Always good to have realistic expectations. The passive-aggressive jab reopened old wounds. I called Rachel, hurt and angry. "Ignore him," she advised. "He's just being a jerk because he's stuck in a job he hates while you're following your passion." I tried to follow her advice, channeling my frustration into preparing for the health department inspection. The first visit resulted in a list of minor violations that required immediate attention: a drain that wasn't properly sloped, insufficient lighting in a storage area, improperly labeled containers. Each fix ate into my dwindling contingency fund. The second inspection, scheduled just 3 weeks before my planned opening, brought unexpected support from an unlikely source. As the health inspector meticulously examined each corner of the kitchen, the bell above the front door jingled. I glanced up to see Stephanie, my father's wife, standing awkwardly in the entryway. "Is this a bad time?" she asked, eyeing the inspector. "Kind of," I admitted. "Health inspection." She nodded understanding. "I'll wait." 30 minutes later, after addressing the inspector's final concerns and receiving conditional approval pending one last check, I joined Stephanie at one of the newly installed cafe tables. "This place looks amazing," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Your father mentioned you were opening soon. I thought I'd stop by." "Dad talked about my bakery?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Stephanie smiled tentatively. "More than you might think. He drives by here almost every day, you know. Never stops, but always slows down." The revelation that my father was keeping tabs on my progress, however distantly, gave me a flicker of hope. Perhaps the divide wasn't as unbridgeable as I'd thought. With opening day approaching, I made a bold decision. I would invite my entire family, mother, father, Stephanie, Jason, and of course, Rachel, to the grand opening. Not just as regular customers, but as honored guests. I designed formal invitations, complete with gold embossing that matched the bakery's sign. To each, I added a personal note. To my mother, your strength and persistence taught me to never give up, even when it was hard. I hope you'll see that I was listening. To my father and Stephanie, your practical advice helped more than you know. The business plan would make you proud. To Jason, I've missed my big brother. Maybe we can disagree about career paths and still be family? The responses trickled in slowly. My mother's brief text, we'll see if we can make it. Depends on my schedule. My father's slightly warmer message, proud of your persistence, Melissa. We'll try to attend if work allows. From Jason, nothing but silence. As I hung the coming soon sign in the window and finalized the opening day menu, featuring many of Grandma Eleanor's recipes alongside my own creations, I tried to prepare myself for the possibility that the reserved family table might remain empty. The bakery would open either way. Eleanor's rise would still rise. The night before the grand opening, I barely slept. My mind raced with checklists, second guesses, and anxiety dreams about burned pastries and empty shops. I finally gave up at 2 a.m., showering quickly before heading to the bakery. The streets of Millfield were deserted, storefronts dark, as I unlocked the back door of Eleanor's rise. The kitchen gleamed in the fluorescent light, every surface spotless, equipment arranged precisely as I needed it. The quiet was almost reverential. I tied on my apron, the professional black one I'd used in New York, not the childish embroidered one from my father, and got to work. First, the breads that would need time to rise, the classic sourdough, the cinnamon raisin loaf, the rosemary focaccia. Then the croissant dough, which had been laminating in stages for 2 days already. The rhythmic movements calmed my nerves, measuring, mixing, kneading. This was what I knew. This was home. At 4:30 a.m., my phone rang. My stomach dropped when I saw the caller ID, Zoe Palmer, my newly hired assistant baker. Melissa, I'm so sorry, Zoe's voice sounded raspy and weak. I've been up all night with a stomach bug. There's no way I can bake today. My mind raced. Opening day required at least 2 bakers to handle the anticipated volume. I'd planned every recipe around having Zoe's help. Don't worry about it, I assured her, hiding my panic. Just focus on getting better. After hanging up, I braced myself against the counter, fighting a wave of despair. I couldn't do this alone. Not today of all days. The carefully orchestrated schedule would be impossible to maintain solo. For a moment, I considered postponing the opening, but the social media announcements had been made, local press alerted, special ingredients ordered. There was no going back. I called the only person I knew would answer at this hour. Rachel? I need help. My sister arrived 20 minutes later, hair unbrushed, still in her pajama pants under her coat. Put me to work, she said, grabbing an apron from the hook. Rachel, you're amazing, but you don't know how to make professional pastries, I said, already regretting my desperate call. She opened her mouth to respond when the back door opened again. A tall figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the pre-dawn darkness. My brother Jason, dressed in jeans and a worn sweatshirt, stood awkwardly in the doorway. Rachel texted, he explained simply. Said you needed help. I stared at my siblings, unable to process Jason's unexpected appearance. We hadn't spoken directly in nearly 3 years, communicating only through brief, impersonal family group texts. I began. I can follow directions, Jason interrupted, shrugging off his jacket. And I've eaten enough baked goods to know what they're supposed to look like. Just tell me what to do. Still stunned, I handed him an apron. He took it without comment, tying it around his waist with an efficiency that reminded me of our father. Wash your hands, I instructed automatically. Up to the elbows. Thoroughly. He complied without argument, a strange reversal of our childhood dynamic where he'd been the one giving orders. Rachel followed suit, practically bouncing with excitement despite the early hour. I quickly reassigned tasks, giving Rachel the simplest jobs, measuring ingredients, lining baking sheets with parchment, filling piping bags. To my surprise, Jason demonstrated unexpected competence in the kitchen. His engineer's precision made him ideal for tasks requiring exact measurements and consistent repetition. We worked in near silence at first, the only sounds the whir of mixers, the thump of dough against countertops, the timer's persistent beeping. Gradually, the silence became less strained. Rachel started humming, then singing softly, a habit from childhood that had once irritated Jason and me but now felt oddly comforting. "Remember when Grandma Eleanor taught us to make Christmas cookies?" Rachel asked, carefully spacing balls of snickerdoodle dough on a baking sheet. "Jason, you ate so much raw dough Mom said you'd get worms." Jason's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I threw up all night. Thought it was the worms coming out." "It was just sugar overload," I added, surprised to find myself smiling at the memory. The sky outside began to lighten, dawn breaking over Millfield. The display cases slowly filled with pastries, each item meticulously arranged. Crusty artisan breads cooled on racks. The scent of butter, sugar, and vanilla permeated the air. The bakery was coming to life. "This is really impressive, Mel," Jason said quietly, surveying the results of our labor. His use of my childhood nickname didn't escape my notice. Before I could respond, the front door rattled, the coffee delivery had arrived. But instead of the expected van, a beat-up pickup truck idled at the curb. "There's a problem," the driver explained. "Delivery van broke down about 20 miles out. I've got your order, but the specialty blends are still stuck with the main van." The custom coffee blends I'd selected to complement the pastries were a key part of the opening day experience. Without them, I'd have to serve generic coffee, an unthinkable compromise for a grand opening. Jason overheard the exchange. "What kind of car does the other driver have? Where exactly are they stuck?" 5 minutes later, after a flurry of phone calls, Jason had organized a rescue mission. His friend Brett, who lived near the stranded van, would pick up the coffee and drive it to Millfield. Another friend would meet Brett halfway to save time. "They'll have it here by opening," Jason assured me. "Brett owes me a favor anyway." As we approached the 7 a.m. opening, Rachel and I arranged the display case according to the diagram I'd planned weeks earlier. Grandma Eleanor's recipes occupied the center shelf, her famous cinnamon rolls, pecan sticky buns, and apple hand pies positioned to catch customers' eyes first. "These look exactly like hers," Rachel said softly, arranging the last cinnamon roll. She'd be so proud. The local newspaper photographer arrived at 6:45 a.m., eager to capture images before customers arrived. He took photos of the gleaming display cases, the rustic chic interior, and insisted on a shot of me standing proudly in front of the kitchen. I hesitated, then impulsively called Rachel and Jason to join me. The photographer captured the three of us, flour-dusted and tired but smiling, the Eleanor's Rise sign visible above our heads. By 6:55 a.m., a small line had formed outside. Through the glass, I recognized neighbors, former teachers, and local business owners curious about the new establishment. I'd set up a small round table near the window, reserved with an elegant card-reading family. 5 chairs surrounded it. I checked my phone one last time. No messages from either parent. Jason followed my gaze to the empty table. "They might still come," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After years of estrangement, Jason's presence felt like a miracle in itself. I wouldn't allow myself to hope for more. At precisely 7 a.m., I smoothed down my chef's coat, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. My hand trembled slightly as I turned the lock and flipped the sign from closed to open. Eleanor's Rise was officially born. The moment I opened the doors, the bakery came alive. Customers streamed in with genuine excitement, many greeting me by name, former classmates, neighbors, people I'd known since childhood but had lost touch with during my New York years. The warmth of their welcome almost overwhelmed me. "Melissa Harper. I knew you'd do something special after you left town," exclaimed Mrs. Peterson, my high school English teacher. "The place looks magnificent." The first rush exceeded my wildest expectations. Rachel manned the register with natural charm, chatting with customers and suggesting pairings with obvious pride in her voice. "The lavender shortbread is my sister's specialty, goes perfectly with the Earl Grey tea." To my continued amazement, Jason stayed, positioning himself at the coffee station where he maintained orderly lines and helped elderly customers carry their selections to the cafe tables. The specialty coffee blends had arrived just in time, thanks to his friend's relay system. "Did you try the almond croissant?" I overheard him asking a customer. "My sister trained in New York with some famous French guy. These are the real deal." My heart swelled hearing him promote my work with such enthusiasm. This was the brother I remembered from childhood, before career expectations and family tensions had driven us apart. Local business owners arrived bearing congratulatory gifts, a potted plant from the florist next door, a handmade sign from the woodworker down the street. Each gesture reinforced what I'd missed during my years away, the sense of community that made Millfield special. Around 9:30 a.m., during a brief lull, the bell above the door chimed. I looked up from restocking the display case to see my mother standing in the entrance, still wearing her navy blue nursing scrubs. She must have come directly from her night shift. Her eyes scanned the bakery, taking in the decor, the customers, and finally landing on me. I froze, pastry bag suspended midair. After our awkward grocery store encounter, I hadn't been certain she would come at all. Now she stood just feet away, her expression unreadable. "Mom," I said, stepping out from behind the counter. "You made it." She nodded stiffly. I said I would try. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I gestured toward the reserved table. "There's coffee. And anything in the case you'd like to try. On the house, of course." "It's very professional," she said, moving toward the display case. Her tone wasn't exactly complimentary, but it wasn't dismissive either. "Rachel and Jason have been helping," I offered, watching her reaction. Her eyebrows rose slightly at Jason's name. "Jason is here?" As if on cue, my brother emerged from the back with a fresh carafe of coffee. He stopped short when he saw our mother. "Hey, Mom," he said cautiously. She looked between us, clearly trying to reconcile the image of her estranged children working together in a bakery. "This is unexpected." Rachel appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her cheek. "Mom. You came." Her genuine enthusiasm momentarily lightened the atmosphere. I guided my mother to the reserved table, bringing her a cup of coffee and a selection of pastries. She sat stiffly, inspecting each item with clinical precision before taking a small, tentative bite of a cinnamon roll. Her eyes widened slightly. "This tastes exactly like your grandmother's." "That's her recipe," I confirmed. "Most of the signature items are based on her techniques, but with my own touches." She nodded, taking another bite. I sensed her conducting an internal debate, weighing years of disapproval against the evidence of success before her eyes. The bakery was clearly thriving, even in its first hours. Customers filled nearly every table, the register rang steadily, and compliments flowed freely. "It seems you've done well for yourself," she finally said, her voice careful. Not quite approval, but not rejection either. By noon, the initial rush had subsided. The display case looked respectably depleted, not empty enough to suggest poor planning, but sold down enough to indicate success. I was just beginning to relax when the bell chimed again. My father entered, followed by Stephanie. They paused just inside the door, taking in the scene. Dad was dressed in his business casual attire. He must have taken time off work to attend. Stephanie carried a large gift basket wrapped in cellophane and tied with a gold ribbon. "Quite a turnout," my father remarked, approaching the counter. Congratulations, Melissa. Thank you, I replied, surprised by the lump forming in my throat. I'm glad you could come. Stephanie stepped forward with the basket. Just some things for the kitchen. Specialty oils, local honey, that sort of thing. She smiled tentatively. The place looks amazing. Really professional. The family table is over there, I said, pointing to where my mother sat watching our interaction. If you'd like to join. My father's expression tightened as he spotted his ex-wife. Maybe we'll just grab something to go. Daniel, Stephanie murmured, placing a hand on his arm. We talked about this. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I led them to the table, where my mother straightened in her chair, her posture defensive. Grace, my father acknowledged stiffly. Daniel. Stephanie, my mother replied, equally formal. The tension was palpable as they arranged themselves around the table, leaving an empty chair between my parents. Rachel quickly brought coffee for the newcomers, chattering nervously about the morning rush. I returned to serving customers, but kept one eye on the family table. The conversation appeared strained, limited to brief observations about the bakery and awkward questions about each other's health and work. Still, they were trying, which meant more than they could know. My father wandered to the display case during a lull, examining the remaining pastries with genuine interest. These look professional grade, he commented. The kind of thing you'd see in a fancy Manhattan bakery. Pride warmed my chest. That's exactly the standard I'm aiming for. Quality that could compete anywhere, but with the flavors that remind people of home. He nodded thoughtfully. Smart business model. Nostalgic enough for locals, sophisticated enough to attract visitors from the city. He glanced around the space again. You've thought this through more thoroughly than I gave you credit for. I did learn something from all those business school brochures you gave me, I said with a small smile. Just applied it differently than you expected. My father chuckled, a genuine sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Fair enough. Across the room, I noticed my mother listening to our exchange, her expression complicated. As my father returned to the table, she leaned forward. The cinnamon rolls really are exceptional, she said, just loudly enough for me to hear. Melissa always did have a special touch with pastry, even as a child. My father raised an eyebrow, surprised by this concession. Yes, she did, he agreed cautiously. Remember those misshapen cookies she'd make for my office? My colleagues fought over them anyway because they tasted so good. You never told me that, I said, pausing from wiping down the counter. Didn't I? He looked momentarily confused. They used to ask when the next batch was coming. Jim from accounting once offered me concert tickets in exchange for a dozen. This small revelation, that my father had been proud of my baking even while discouraging it as a career, shifted something in the atmosphere. My mother's posture relaxed slightly. She was always covered in flour, she recalled, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. I'd find it in the strangest places, behind her ears, in her socks. Still happens, Rachel chimed in, pointing to the smudge of flour on her own face. Occupational hazard in this family. The phrase "in this family" hung in the air, a gentle reminder of connections that had frayed but never fully broken. The moment of warmth might have continued if not for Stephanie's innocent question. Did you always know you wanted to be a baker, Melissa? My mother stiffened. She was planning to attend nursing school before the culinary distraction. It wasn't a distraction, I corrected automatically. It was my passion. A passion that could have remained a hobby alongside a stable career, my mother countered, her tone sharpening. My father set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. Here we go again. Always so practical, Grace. Heaven forbid anyone follow their dreams if it doesn't include health insurance and a pension. Some of us didn't have the luxury of dreams, Daniel, she snapped. Some of us had to be realistic. The familiar pattern of their arguing, the very dynamic that had characterized my childhood, reasserted itself with alarming speed. Old resentments about the divorce surfaced, thinly veiled as concerns about my career choices. You always undermined her creativity, my father accused. And you encouraged impractical fantasies, my mother retorted. Jason, who had been refilling coffee urns, approached the table. Guys, maybe not here. You were no better, my mother turned on him. Mocking your sister's ambitions while pursuing the safe path yourself. Leave him out of this, I interjected. Why? He's part of it. This whole family dysfunction, my father gestured broadly. Everyone choosing sides, everyone judging everyone else's choices. The volume of their voices had risen enough to draw attention from nearby customers. Rachel shot me a panicked look from behind the register. Something in me snapped, the culmination of years of being torn between family expectations and personal dreams, of trying to earn approval while staying true to myself. Before I could second guess, I stepped into the middle of the bakery. Enough! I shouted, my voice carrying across the now silent shop. My family froze, along with every customer present. I never raised my voice, not even during the worst kitchen disasters at Sophia's bakery had I lost my composure so completely. This, I said, struggling to control my trembling voice, is exactly why I left. And exactly what I've been trying to heal from by coming back. I gestured around the bakery. Do you know why I love baking? Because when everyone in our house was shouting, when you were all choosing sides and trying to make me choose too, the kitchen was the only place that made sense. It was the only place where effort and care consistently resulted in something good. Tears threatened, but I forced myself to continue. Every time you fought, I baked. Every disappointment became a new recipe. Every heartbreak turned into something sweet or savory or beautiful. My voice caught. Baking wasn't a distraction or a hobby or a waste of potential. It was how I survived this family. The raw honesty hung in the air. My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father stared at the floor. Jason looked stricken. I didn't build this bakery to prove you wrong, I continued more softly. I built it because it's who I am. It's the best of what Grandma Eleanor taught me, and the best of what I learned away from here. And yes, even the best of what all of you taught me, persistence, practicality, precision. I took a deep, steadying breath. This place isn't just my dream. It's my healing. And I invited you here today not to seek your approval, but to offer reconciliation. Because despite everything, we're still family. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then, to everyone's surprise, Jason stepped forward. I'm sorry, Mel, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I was a complete jerk about your career choices. The truth is, I was jealous. Jealous? I echoed, confused. He nodded. You always knew exactly what you wanted. You were willing to fight for it, even when it was hard. I took the safe route, did what was expected, and I've been miserable in engineering. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Turns out following other people's dreams for you isn't the path to happiness. My mother stood slowly from her chair. I was afraid, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Afraid you'd struggle the way I did after the divorce. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you toward security. She swallowed hard. I never considered that your happiness might be more important than my fear. My father cleared his throat. And I think I was trying to live vicariously through you. I gave up my own creative ambitions for the corporate ladder. Seeing you refuse to compromise made me question my own choices. He glanced at Stephanie, who nodded encouragingly. That's not an excuse for withdrawing support. It's just context. The tension in the bakery had transformed into something different, still heavy, but no longer toxic. Customers discreetly returned to their conversations, giving our family moment the privacy it deserved. Rachel, ever the peacemaker, broke the awkward silence. Group hug? Too much? Yeah, probably too much. A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. My father hesitantly extended his hand toward my mother, not romantically, but as a gesture of truce. After a moment's consideration, she accepted it. Jason stepped closer, placing his hand over theirs. I added mine to the pile, and Rachel completed the circle. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, too many years of hurt couldn't be erased in a single moment. But it was a beginning, bridged by butter, flour, and sugar. The bell above the door chimed again. I looked up to see Sophia, my New York mentor, standing in the entrance, travel bag in hand. "Surprise," she announced, surveying the bakery with approving eyes. "I saw the social media posts and drove 3 hours to see this place for myself. Looks like I arrived just in time for the family drama portion of the day." Her unexpected appearance lightened the mood considerably. I introduced her to my family, watching with amusement as my father straightened his posture when I mentioned her successful bakery empire. Sophia inspected the display case with professional scrutiny, sampling several items before declaring her verdict: Manhattan quality with hometown soul. Perfect combination. She raised her coffee cup in a toast. To Eleanor's rise, and to the baker who rose to the occasion despite the odds. My family raised their cups in response, a simple gesture that meant everything. In that moment, surrounded by the fruits of my labor and the people who had shaped me, for better and worse, I felt something long missing click into place. Not completion, but continuation. Not an ending, but a new beginning. Eleanor's rise was more than a bakery. It was the story of my journey, made manifest in brick and butter and brave new starts. The closed sign swung gently on the door as I locked it behind the last customers. Outside, dusk painted Millfield's main street in soft purples and golds. My first day as a bakery owner had officially ended. Inside, my family, all of them, surprisingly, remained. My mother wiped down tables with the efficiency of someone accustomed to hospital sanitation standards. My father and Stephanie collected empty coffee cups and plates. Jason and Rachel counted the day's earnings at the register, playfully arguing over Rachel's math. "Final count?" I asked, untying my apron for the first time since 2 a.m. 178 customers, Rachel announced proudly. "And we sold out of cinnamon rolls by 10, croissants by 11:30. "The register matches the sales tickets exactly," Jason added. "And you exceeded your projected first-day revenue by 32%. I raised an eyebrow. "You figured that out just now?" He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I may have looked at your business plan when you were in the kitchen." Professional curiosity. We gathered around the family table one last time, sharing the few remaining pastries and recounting highlights from the day. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by a tentative warmth that felt both familiar and new. "The lemon tarts were exceptional," my mother said, surprising me with a specific compliment. "I had two." "Thanks, Mom. That's actually my own recipe, developed it during my second year in New York." She nodded, considering this. "I'd like to learn how to make them sometime. If you're willing to teach me." The offer of shared activity, something we hadn't done together since I was a child, felt monumental. "I'd like that," I replied simply. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, leaned forward. "We should do this more often," he suggested. Not the working part, though that was surprisingly satisfying, but the being together part. He glanced at his ex-wife cautiously. "Maybe a monthly family dinner at Melissa's apartment?" Neutral territory. Before my mother could respond, Jason interjected. "Speaking of working, I've been meaning to tell you all something." He took a deep breath. "I've been taking night classes in business administration. I'm planning to leave engineering." "What?" my father exclaimed. "Since when?" "About a year," Jason admitted. I realized I was following a path that made me miserable. Watching Mel today, seeing her in her element, just confirmed what I already knew. He turned to me. "Actually, I was wondering if you might need help with the business side of things here. Part-time to start. I could handle bookkeeping, ordering, scheduling while you focus on the baking." The offer stunned me. "You want to work at the bakery? With me?" "If you'll have me," he replied. "I'm not saying I want to become a baker, but the business operations, that's something I could be good at." something useful. I thought about his organizational skills, his attention to detail, his quick thinking when the coffee delivery failed. We'd need to discuss terms, I said, trying to sound businesslike despite my emotion. But yes, I think we could make that work. My mother set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Well, if everyone is making announcements, I suppose I should make mine. I've applied for a supervisory position at the hospital, day shift, Monday through Friday. If I get it, I'd have more regular hours. More predictable family time. The significance of her statement wasn't lost on anyone. After years of prioritizing work over everything else, she was making room for relationships. For reconciliation. As we finished the impromptu family dinner, my father produced a small frame from the gift basket Stephanie had brought. "For your wall," he said, handing it to me. "Every business needs one." Inside the frame was a crisp $1 bill, the traditional first-earned dollar. But instead of simply framing the money, my father had created space around it for signatures. He took out a pen and signed his name in one corner, then passed it to my mother, then Jason, Rachel, and finally Stephanie. When it returned to me, the dollar was surrounded by the names of everyone who had witnessed my dream become reality. "Now it's your turn," my father said. I added my signature, then stood to place the frame on the wall near the register. "The first of many dollars," I said, "and the most meaningful." Gradually, my family gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. Hugs were exchanged, slightly awkward but genuine. Plans were made for my mother's baking lesson the following Sunday, for Jason to return Monday to discuss his potential role in the business. Finally, only I remained in the quiet bakery. I walked through the space slowly, absorbing the events of this extraordinary day. The display cases stood empty, ready for tomorrow's creations. The chairs were neatly tucked under tables. The kitchen, cleaned and organized, awaited morning. As I performed a final check of the register, I noticed a small envelope tucked underneath, my name written in my mother's precise handwriting. Inside was a yellowed recipe card, the paper brittle with age, the handwriting distinctly my grandmother's. Her original cinnamon roll recipe, complete with notes in the margins and butter stains on the corners. Below Grandma Eleanor's instructions, my mother had added a note: "She was right about you all along. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Tears blurred my vision as I carefully returned the recipe to its envelope. The bakery around me, my bakery, represented so much more than a business venture. It was the physical manifestation of faith, my grandmother's faith in me, and ultimately, my faith in myself. The journey from ambitious child to bakery owner had been longer and more winding than I'd imagined. It had cost me relationships, security, and countless hours of sleep. But standing in the quiet aftermath of opening day, I understood that following your dream can sometimes heal more than just yourself. It can create a space where broken relationships find neutral ground, where old wounds begin to mend over shared bread and coffee. My grandmother had somehow known this would happen. Her inheritance wasn't just about funding a bakery, it was about bringing a fractured family back to the same table. About rising together, not despite our differences, but with them incorporated into something new and stronger. I turned off the lights and locked the back door, stepping into the cool evening air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more baking, more customers, the beginning of building a sustainable business. But tonight, I carried with me the certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Have you ever had to choose between following expectations and pursuing your own path? Did it create tension with the people you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful destinations, and sometimes, like in my case, they can even bring healing to relationships you thought were broken beyond repair. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more from me, and share with someone who might need encouragement to follow their own dreams today. Thank you for being part of my journey, and remember, the most meaningful rises often come after the most difficult kneading.